You young people have been charged with possession of narcotics. And 2 of you are charged with selling heroin to other youngsters in your neighborhood. There's nothing funny about these charges. Of all the crimes the courts must deal with, there's nothing more despicable than dope peddling. I'm going to set your bail at $10,000. Yes, that's just as high as I can make it. I believe this crime is worse, much worse, than murder.
A series of dramatic arrests like this one during the past few months have served to highlight one of the nation's most horrible sores, narcotics, and the fantastic inroads the traffic in dope has made on our youth. This is John Daly, your March of Time reporter. Today we're bringing you a pictorial report on teenage dope addiction and the sinister outlaw industry that lies behind it. We're going to talk to Earl Brown, New York City councilman and Life magazine reporter, who prepared the dramatic life picture story on narcotics, which shocked the nation a short time ago, and to Ed Mowry, prize-winning newspaperman, whose courageous reporting for the New York World Telegram and Sun aroused the public to the evils of dope among our teenagers. We're also going to talk to some private citizens on what can be done about this problem of dope. And now let's go in and talk to Ed Mowry and Earl Brown about what they have to say on this twin problem of dope and teenagers. Ed Mowry?
You must be John Daly.
Right. Then you must be Earl Brown.
Hello. That's
Good
right.
to see you. I must say I'm very glad to see both of you, because you 2 gentlemen of the press probably know more about this matter, or as much about this matter of narcotics and teenage addiction as anybody in the country. So I've come down from the March of Time to ask you some questions.
Go right ahead, John.
Glad to hear it.
Well, Earl, I saw your spread in Life magazine a few weeks ago, and Ed, I've been reading your pieces in the New York World Telegram and Sun, and your general writing in this area in the Scripps Howard papers, and I'd like to get right into this very serious problem of narcotics.
Well, John, I've covered lots of rackets and lots of crime stories in my day, and I know Ed has too. But I've never had anything to hit me like the story I worked on for life about narcotics.
You feel that way, Ed?
I certainly do, John. Like Earl says, you're supposed to be calloused when you cover certain phases of crime for a large paper. You get used to it. But when such a scourge as this dips to the teenage level, where thousands of children are being enslaved, it makes veteran newspapermen shudder.
You know something? I feel so indignant about the whole thing that if I ever saw a dope peddler selling 1 cap of heroin to a kid, I would be perfectly willing to shoot him myself.
Well, I think with you that this teenage problem and the fact that they are selling to teenagers is the worst one, but I know only generally what I have read in your magazines, the newspapers you serve, and I want to get down at the root base of this whole narcotics traffic. So let's begin with an idea of just where does it all start, this dope addiction?
Well, it's somewhat similar, John, to the chicken and the egg. Which comes first? You have a lush market for the peddler. You have children who must have the product of the peddler, heroin. Heroin is a terror drug. And this is just an endless cycle.
Well, you mean that the children who use heroin can be then used to get new victims?
That's
for
right.
The pushers who increase the amount they bring in, and it just builds up.
In fact, it's a 5-for-1 proposition. Each addict, in many cases, is told to get 5 more customers.
All right, well, now we've got into the broad scope of it. Let's get a little bit more specific. And where do you think we ought to start?
Well, why don't you get Ed to tell you something about the business organization of the narcotics racket? Because it really is a business. That's where it starts.
Is it big business, Ed?
It's big business. It's worldwide business. It runs into untold millions of dollars on the international front, if you want to call it. It's a very efficient business, John. In fact, if the people were as efficient in combating it as the dope rings are in pushing their venom through the teenage ranks, we'd get someplace, but we're not getting any place.
Well, now, what about victims, Ed? Do they find their victims everywhere?
They find their victims in every civilized country. And as the United Nations has pointed out, it's currently a world problem.
And so it goes across all national boundaries, color boundaries, ism boundaries. Everybody has to fight this thing and be afraid of it.
Plus economic lines well, they cross all the economic lines, John.
It's just a matter you have to find money for it.
It is.
Now, still, Ed, where do we start? When you start talking about this great international narcotics traffic, where does it actually start?
Well, it must, John, start on the poppy field level in Asiatic countries. That's where the opium poppy is grown. We don't grow it here. This opium poppy supplies a flower which has a seed. This is distilled. And while I must point out, John, that there's a distinct medical need for some derivatives of opium. Heroin is not one of them. Heroin is an outlaw drug. Morphine, of course, humanity would be simply out of luck without morphine.
Well, then heroin and morphine are both derivatives of
They
opium.
are both derivatives of opium.
I see, fine. Now, once we get off the farmer's field, they distill this opium, I take it, in substantial quantities.
It is distilled, of course, for medical needs in legal laboratories. It goes into clandestine plants in various parts of the Far East for the underworld market.
Well, now, where do we find the bulk of the raw opium out of which we get our heroin?
Well, you're finding it today in various parts of the world. Turkey has seen many seizures in the last few months of huge amounts, hundreds of kilos.
Of heroin,
That's of heroin.
Fine. Well, now, before we go any further, let's talk about a kilo. Just how much is a kilo, Ed?
Well, John, as a matter of fact, I'm preparing some notes for this piece on that very subject. Will you hand me that box of sugar?
You mean this, Ed?
Yes. This is 1 ounce less than 1 kilo, and kilo, incidentally, is short for kilogram or 1,000 grams.
That 2-pound box of sugar is 1 ounce less than a kilo.
Yes, and John, take a look at that box. I want to make a point. On the Hong Kong waterfront today are 500 tons of raw opium. Of course, heroin is a derivative of opium, waiting for a world market. And there have been accusations against the communist regime that they are trying to sabotage the free world by dumping that on the market.
Well, now, I'd like to go back to this, if I may, to this kilo.
Yeah.
This alone seems to me to be a pretty substantial amount of narcotics.
Oh, certainly. This 2 pounds, or rather 33 ounces, 1 kilo of heroin, is systematically broken from the clandestine level. It's doubled up on each level of operation, the underworld operation. First of all, your wholesaler doubles his amount of money by cutting the purity.
You mean he gets it? How much does he pay for it originally?
He pays $1,000 approximately per kilo.
And then he takes it and cuts it in half?
He cuts it first 50% to make $1,000. The next handler cuts it 50%. And it goes down sometimes to 16 to 30 cuttings to arrive on the New York, Chicago, or Detroit sidewalk level at 5% purity, where it is sold for $2 a capsule, and the capsule can vary from 1 1/4 to 2 grains.
Good heavenly days, that must mean profit. I mean, really great profits, doesn't it?
It's fantastic.
Well, Earl, can you give us any idea of, in your examination, when you wrote that life piece, how much profit would they actually get out of this?
Well, that 1 kilo of pure heroin makes 133,000 capsules or caps. You figure that out for yourself.
133,000 capsules at $2 a capsule. That's $266,000. Those are fantastic profits.
Fantastic, that's the only word for it. But it is really fantastically attractive to those who don't mind breaking the law.
Well, it's big business, John. It runs in untold millions. We illustrated a moment ago, I think, this much pure heroin would be worth $250,000. There's just no end to the amount of money made by these people.
And that is big business.
That is big business.
Very big. Well, now, how about bringing this sort of thing into the country, Earl?
Simple. It is very easy to smuggle. 1 little sack like that.
In a moment, we'll go on with this absorbing story of teenagers and narcotics as told to us by Earl Brown of Life magazine and Ed Mowry of Scripps Howard newspapers. But first, here's a message of interest. Granted that they can get it in, what happens to this valuable package of dope when it gets here to New York, for instance?
Well, then you hit the, we'll call the domestic rat race among the opium rings and the dope rings. They must keep it moving fast. It goes from one peddler to another. They'll use all sorts of artifices. And I think the classic example is one that happened recently in New York. The peddler met his, what they call, connection. He in turn met a buyer in a hotel lobby. The peddler does not keep any heroin on his person. The New York cops are too smart for that. So he meets his man in the lobby of a hotel or even a bus terminal. He gives him a piece of paper with a telephone number on the piece of paper. Of course, the man buying the heroin will slip him some money. The purchaser then takes the slip of paper with the number. He hunts up the telephone booth with the corresponding number, and he reaches under the armrest and finds his heroin taped to the armrest.
And certainly the New York police can't check every single telephone booth in this big city, can they?
That's quite impossible.
Oh, it's no problem at all to pass the stuff once it's broken up. As a matter of fact, a capsule of heroin is no larger than a big vitamin pill.
Well, now, it's easy to understand why we're having such a terrible time coping with these narcotic rings, but I'd like to examine the other side of the coin, the consumer. What about these kids who take dope?
Well, that's the tragedy of the problem, the kids. I've been following many cases for some time, and it would make your heart break to know about them. Boys and girls, 13, 14 years old, who don't know any better, can't know any better. Here they are, stuck with being dope addicts, maybe for the rest of their lives. We covered many such cases in our life story in the Bronx, on the East Side, and up in Harlem.
Well, Earl, I'd like to interrupt there. There's a connotation about Harlem I think it isn't justified. It would be a tragic error if the American people were to think that teenage dope addiction is confined to any city, any section of a city, for any people, like the Negroes, for instance. It's simply not true.
Well, you were certainly right there, Ed. As a matter of fact, I certainly didn't intend to give that impression. The dope practice and habit spreads among all groups and all people. And the great problem is today that it is growing in many American cities.
Well, now, how do these kids get started?
Well, John, you undoubtedly read about or perhaps listened to some of the testimony that came out of the Goldstein hearings, the New York State probe into a teenage addiction. There you have revelations that there are 5,000 teenage addicts, that they're hopelessly debauched. It's gone to the school level. You had tape recordings of some of their actual testimony. You had flesh witnesses, as they call them. You had the pathetic tale of one little girl who started at 13, who went into depravity. She even admitted that she used cocaine, which hasn't been prevalent in the United States for at least a year and a half. I think the best example there is to take a look at the sequence that we just saw of the 6 kids in the courtroom. The tall boy with the unruly hair, he looks about 15. He probably started the way so many of them do. He wanted to keep up with the gang. A kid at that age feels social pressure more than we know. It could happen in the most innocent place, the neighborhood sandwich shop or the local drugstore. The gang starts working on him, kidding him. Pretty soon he decides to be a regular guy. He doesn't want to be called chicken, so he takes the first step, the first cap. But even after he's gotten over that first big bluff, after he thinks he's in, he needs some more work before he gets the dope habit. Usually it's a party, a regular neighborhood party, with the folks away. Nothing an unobservant family would notice. And one of the boys is smoking marijuana. Weed, they call it, or reefers. They make you feel dreamy. But they're like punk to a firecracker. Danger. One of the girls says you're a sissy if you don't try a sniff. Just a little snort. And you can't be called a sissy just when the gang is starting to accept you, so you take one. It nearly makes you sick at first. Your system isn't used to it. But there's that detached feeling. You're on top of the world. You're a pretty big guy now. And you don't even stop to wonder or think what this is doing to you. The parties, you have a lot of parties, all kinds of parties. But you kid yourself that heroin isn't harming you. As to your appetite, well, you don't feel like eating. His schoolwork suffers. He's drowsy, loggy. Just can't concentrate on what he's doing. And he doesn't care much. And the real bad thing, as far as he's concerned, that is, he's got no pep for sports. He's exhausted all the time. Looks like they'll have to get a new shortstop, and he really wanted to play. Now he needs more than one snort every now and then. He needs one, maybe two, every single day. They cost $2 apiece. And he's long since run through his allowance, so the next step is stealing. There, that'll keep Johnny happy for a few days, and Mom will never notice. That's about how it starts and about how fast it moves along.
You'll always find petty crime mixed up with dope addicts at this stage, John. Then it gets more serious. And don't forget that crime does not breed dope addiction, but dope addiction breeds crime. All kinds of crime.
Well, now, this kid is moving into a pretty serious stage, isn't he, Ed?
You bet he is, John. This kid's desperate now. He's broke.
Shorty. Yeah, kid? What's up? Shorty, I gotta have a snort. Sure, kid. Why not?
6 bits.
Shorty, I couldn't get 6 bits. Can't you trust me?
Kid, I wouldn't even trust my old grandmother.
Shorty, I gotta.
Hey, you really need it, huh, kid? Tell you what we'll do. You go out and get me 5 more customers, and I'll let you have yours free. You think you can do it?
Sure, Shorty. Can I have one now?
Okay, kid. Here you are. Now, you bring those 5 kids back here tonight, right?
Yeah.
He'll be back all right, John, with the 5 other kids. That's how this vicious habit spreads.
Well, that's a bad situation. What's being done for these kids?
Practically nothing, John. There's only one hospital in the entire country prepared to accept dope cases, Lexington, Kentucky.
That's a federal hospital.
Federal hospital, and it's by no means satisfactory. Kids are thrown in there with hardened criminals and even perverts. And when they come out, they go right back on dope. And furthermore, there's not a single state hospital in the country prepared to accept dope cases.
Well, this is a pretty serious business, all right, isn't it, Ed?
Well, serious. John, the World Telegram and Sun for nearly 13 months has called this a crisis. It's a national crisis. There's no one who can tell truthfully how many addicts there are. Kids I'm talking about. And I would venture to say that where this terrible habit is prevalent, New York, Detroit, Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, I think the addicts in those cities could well make up 2 full Army divisions.
Well, isn't anything being done to provide hospitals?
Well, the state certainly isn't doing anything. None of the states are doing anything. Of course, there's only one man in the country, to my knowledge, who is doing something about this. That's Irving Geist, a New York philanthropist, and he's trying to do something now with a hospital for addicts.
I'm just a businessman, not a doctor or a public official. I know something has to be done about the drug addicts in America. 7 men and I have formed a committee to raise $2 million to build a hospital. We are starting this fund off with $100,000 of our own funds. We're going to build a 200-bed hospital in New York City where addicts can come free. And they won't be ashamed to tell where they've been.
Well, that sounds like a start.
I think it's an excellent start, John. Mr. Geist is working with top officials of the American Legion to erect a hospital that will not stigmatize the teenage applicant. In other words, John, they don't want to put this kid on a police blotter when he should be cured. He's a sick boy or girl.
Well, now, Ed, is this dope addiction something that you can live with, or can it be fatal?
Well, the answer to that, of course, is New York's tragic situation in the last few years. Last year in New York City, 58 people died of narcotism, as they call it. 5 of those were under 25 years of age. 23, I beg your pardon, 23 were under 25 years of age, and 5 were teenagers in the last few months. Now, the 58 total is one less than the toll of polio in New York City.
Well, now, Earl, what about the law enforcement side of this dope picture? Aren't there serious penalties for those who are caught peddling this stuff or even have it on their persons?
Serious? Why, John, it's really laughable to use the word serious when you think of the crime involved here. Some states have no laws about dope trafficking whatever. And those that do have laws have only weak laws.
You agree with that, Ed?
Well, I agree 100%. In fact, I'll put the words in the mouth of Commissioner Harry Anslinger of the Narcotic Bureau. He has made the astounding statement that there are only 3 adequate enforcement programs in the United States. And he said that those programs are in California, Florida, and Pennsylvania.
Well, now, speaking of Commissioner Anslinger, would you say that the Federal Narcotics Bureau is doing an adequate job?
I think they're doing an excellent job with the manpower that they have. I might add at this point that one congressman has advocated the death penalty for any peddler, any bum who sells to a teenager.
Well, now, let's look at this business of the Federal Narcotics Bureau. I want to show you a March of Time film report on one of their successful arrests.
Fine.
Strictly undercover is the Treasury's Bureau of Narcotics, whose never-ending job is to combat dope peddling.
You remember Nick Mazurki?
Sure, I remember him.
Well, he's out of the penitentiary now. I have a tip that he's back peddling again. I want you fellows to go after him. Tail him, find out where he's getting the stuff.
Okay.
Through experience in the shadowing of suspected dope peddlers, Treasury agents come to know their hangouts and their usual patterns of operation. Agents know that peddlers buy their supplies through dealers, who often operate a legitimate business as a front. To throw off suspicion, dope is usually planted at a safe distance, but within easy reach of the dealer's blind. To make sure of a conviction, Treasury agents must witness a completed transaction between the peddler and the dealer's boy.
Federal narcotic agents, boys. Keep your hands down. Oh, gun and everything, huh?
They do get their man, John, but you have to multiply that scene thousands of times before you arrive at an adequate program for law enforcement.
Well, now, that's a pretty black picture. And what do you 2 experts say can be done about such a shocking situation?
Well, first, John, I'd say we need much stiffer penalties for criminals who deal in dope on the federal, state, and city level.
And an adequate hospital to take care of its victims.
And also rehabilitation centers for addicts.
Amen. Well, thank you very much, Earl Brown of Life magazine and Ed Mowry of the New York World Telegram and Sun and the Scripps Howard newspapers for opening my eyes on this problem of teenagers and narcotics.
But, John, we've only scratched the surface until we see and hear one of these kids who's actually on the dope habit.
Judge, I didn't mean to do it. I know I'm licked now. I'll go to Lexington. Maybe it won't help me, though. It didn't help Al or Jimmy. They're back on the needle again. But I'll try. Judge, we didn't start out to be crooks or bums or anything. Can't somebody help us?
I think it's up to all of us to help. I'll be back in a moment, but now a message of interest. Join us next week at this same time for another program in our series, The March of Time Through the Years, when we'll present a pictorial report on another vital topic of the day. This is John Daly speaking for The March of Time.
A march of time through the years.